All right, I'm back, and as promised, I'm here to talk to you about Medicaid and what Scott Walker's budget repair bill is going to mean for the Medicaid program in Wisconsin. Now, when this bill was originally pushed through legislature and they were trying to get it passed, it was really easy to jump onto the topic of collective bargaining, which became the kind of hot button topic. And one of the reasons for that is it's really clear what's going to happen to collective bargaining if this bill is passed. Collective bargaining rights will be stripped, other than the ability to negotiate wages. Now, that's pretty obvious, and people kind of know where they stand, how they feel about that. With Medicaid, it's a lot more vague. When Scott Walker was talking about this budget repair bill, he said that if these benefit cuts weren't made, it was going to result in about 1,500 people being laid off from the state employees, or for about 200,000 kids to be bumped off Medicaid. Now, it's important to note that it's not legal to bump people off Medicaid right now. So PolitiFacts pointed that out, and people were kind of, their eyebrows were raised to that statement until they started reading this bill a little more closely. What Medicaid does, for those of people who are not familiar with it, is it provides health insurance for people who don't have access to it otherwise. So for a working family who can't afford the premiums of private health care, they can go on Medicaid, and this ensures that no child is uninsured due to their financial standing, which I think is incredibly important. Also, for people whose employers don't provide a sponsored health care plan, for people who work at places like McDonald's, Kohl's, Roundy's, they can go on Badger Care, on Medicaid. In Wisconsin, we have something called Badger Care, which is our state insurance program. For retired people, the elderly who no longer have an employer to sponsor insurance for them, they can go on Medicaid. And then for adults and children who are struggling with mental illness, with developmental disabilities, with physical disabilities, Medicaid is there to provide coverage for long-term care, which can often be very, very expensive and something that families would not be able to afford without programs like this. Now, what this bill does is it takes Medicaid and it transfers control of that into the hands of the Department of Health Services, which is chaired, from what I can tell, by a budget committee, which right now is largely Republican controlled. The person in charge of this committee is a man named Dennis Smith, who has gone on record saying that he thinks Medicaid should be cut because it would save up to $1 trillion for states. He went on to say that failure to leave Medicaid might be viewed as irresponsible on the part of elected state officials. And I'll link you to the articles where I'm getting these quotes. So this is transferring the power of this program into the hands of someone who has come flat out and said that he does not think it's a good program. But as far as I can tell, he hasn't provided any alternatives for these people who really need health care. I mean, I have access to health care through my employers. State employees have access to health care through their employers. A lot of private companies offer health care for their employees. So that people have access to health care right now, whether it's expensive or not, but they have it there. And so these are people who might not have access to that otherwise and who'd be left without medical coverage and medical care, which I think, honestly, that makes my blood run cold, because I think that it is our job to be taking care of people. And if my tax dollars are going to pay for somebody who can't get health insurance any other way, I am perfectly okay with that, because I think that taking care of people is really important. According to a flyer I saw in the Capitol, and I can show you the photo I took of that as another source, about 1.1 million Wisconsinites are currently on Medicaid. And so this would be transferred into the hands of somebody who was not an elected official. I never had any say in whether this man went into power or not. He was appointed by Scott Walker. And so this is not a person who the people have spoken and said, yes, this is the person we want to be in control of this. And what it means is that this committee has full power over what happens with Medicaid, and they would get to avoid any legislative process that normally goes into the making of laws. So there's a reason that we have our laws set up the way that they are. According, as we learned in elementary school, you have checks and balances. You have 3 different branches of government: the judicial system, the legislative system, and the executive branch. You have that because you want to make sure that one branch doesn't get more power, and that everything is kind of happening fairly and for the will of the people. That's at least the general idea of how this is supposed to work. And whether or not it actually pans out that way is a discussion that I'll leave for another video, or for you to do on your own. But there's a reason that this is set up this way. As Representative Gordon Hintz said in his incredibly impassioned diatribe to the state assembly, which I honestly loved, he said, our founding fathers made it hard to pass big laws for a reason. And yes, it can become a problem when things get mucked up because people are focusing on their own personal agendas as opposed to trying to work together and come to a compromise. But there's a reason that power is not sitting in the hands of one branch or another when it comes to these sort of things. So there's a legislative process that would have to be gone through right now. If they wanted to, say, bump 200,000 kids off Medicaid, they'd have to put it through Senate, they'd have to put it through the Assembly, and it would take a long time and it probably wouldn't pass. This would mean that one committee is in charge of that, and right now that committee is controlled by somebody who is put into power by Scott Walker and who has said, I don't like Medicaid. So this means that the people would not have a say in this. This is not an elected official, as I said. So this would completely defeat the purpose of having the system of government that we have, and it would put the future of a lot of people in the hands of one committee, which to me seems incredibly wrong. Now, I'm not saying that if this bill passes and Medicaid is put into the control of this committee, this specific committee is going to tear it apart and change the laws and things like that. This specific committee might not do that, but you don't know who's going to come afterwards either. So you have one committee in control of this program that affects 1 million people in the state of Wisconsin and provides health care for people who really need it. And who knows who's going to come into power? Maybe it won't happen this year, maybe it won't happen next year, but 10 years down the road, there could be someone who says, I'm going to change this, and there would be no legislative process and no people's say in whether or not this happens. So to me, that honestly makes me sick to my stomach. I think that it's incredibly important that people get educated on this provision of the bill, because if the unions say we only want collective bargaining and you can pass the rest of it, this is one of the things that will be passed with it, and this is not something that I am okay seeing go through. If we need the money that badly, let's get it from somewhere else. I saw a great video posted that said it would cost $32 an adult in Wisconsin to solve this deficit. I personally am willing to pay $32 for myself, and I can afford to pay $32 for someone who can't afford to pay for themselves. So if worse comes to worse, let's get out the cash and just start shelling it out, because honestly, if it means kicking people off of healthcare who really need it and who don't have access to it any other way, there has to be another way to go about getting this deficit fixed. This, to me, is not an acceptable route. And transferring the power into the hands of one committee that is chaired by somebody who has come out and said that he is opposed to this program is incredibly unacceptable, in my opinion. So I'll link you to the articles. Get educated, understand what's on this bill, and form your opinions based on what you really see in front of you and not just what you're being told by people, including me. So thank you for listening, and hopefully this will shed a little more light on what's going on in Madison, Wisconsin. Bye.